Hey, welcome to this afternoon's panel. Where do we go from here? My name is Brian Hamburger. I'm the president and CEO of MarketCounsel, the managing partner of the Hamburger law firm. And I'm joined today with just an outstanding panel of thought and organizational leaders who are really charged with taking out their crystal ball and really identifying what's next. I'm joined by Chris Mone, who's the executive vice president and head of wealth management at Wedbush. Marty Bicknell, the CEO of Mariner Wealth Advisors, Bill Coppell, Chief Growth Officer for First Clearing, and David Canter, Head of RA Segment for Fidelity Clearing and Custody Solutions. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Everyone knows who you guys are, so I'm gonna spare our participants going through each of your really impressive bios. And I want to start by jumping into our first topic, which is the future impact of cybersecurity. I hate the term, but that's what it's known by. There's an interesting thing about high growth industries and their businesses, which is that the optimism that allows them to focus on their growth often blinds them to their own vulnerabilities, cybersecurity being chief among them. Let me start with you, David. Fidelity spends an outstanding amount of money on cybersecurity protection and related issues. As we look to the future of the wealth management space, will the threats continue to outpace our ability to protect ourselves?
Well, good to see you, Brian, and also good to see my co-panelists, and always good to join you at an AdvisorHub event. Congratulations to Tony and the gang. I don't know if I would use the word outpace, but cyber threat and the need for cybersecurity is something we're all going to have to continue to contend with in the future. And I think, we would all agree with that here on this panel. And we, as you know, are very focused on this as a company. At my company, Brian, we've had you tour our facilities. I think there are three things that I'll just kick it off with. First and foremost, we all need to work with our clients to make sure that they understand the threat, because we're in this together. We're here to protect our clients, whether it's intermediaries like advisory businesses or the end clients. Be careful on that which you click, for example. Number two, in addition to that, you're going to probably see more and more types of technology security solutions, beyond the ones that exist today. So be on the lookout for that. I know that's something that all of us are looking to and focusing on. But Brian, just as you would say, also be aware of, your insurance policies. Because, can you have insurance to help you mitigate the risk? But first and foremost, education is key to make sure that we're all clear on the threat and how we can work together to prevent it.
So many of the gaps in cybersecurity are being addressed rather prudently at the enterprise level, right? So when you're running a broker-dealer, larger financial institution, that's where a lot of the investments are. But Marty, many of the exposures that we've seen in the overall industry tend to emanate from users themselves, right? David alluded to watch where you click. How, when you're growing an organization, do you continue to ensure that your end users, right, the advisors out in the field, the assistants, the operations personnel, that they're on top of their game?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian, and I too appreciate being part of this panel. I think as I have conversations with advisors outside of our organization, there's a fear, and justified fear of how exactly small growing RIAs can deal with this, and the advice that we give and the things that we do. For a couple of years now, we've done things from a technology perspective and a cybersecurity perspective that we had no idea what was coming. But because of what was coming with the pandemic and the stay at home and all of that, it elevated us a little bit, or protected us a little bit, to be able to deal with things ahead of when we thought we would need to. But things like we've done a bunch of internal driven programs to test how our advisors and our staff would respond to certain kinds of emails. And when we first started doing that, we had like a 60 or 70% failure rate of where they would click, as David said. And by continuing to test and continuing to do that, we've taught them to be very careful. And we require that everybody goes through an online video testing once a quarter where they have to answer a series of questions afterwards, so we know they're actually watching it. And that's led to those numbers coming down as well. But since the pandemic and the stay at home, we've seen attempts inside our organization go up by over 80%. I mean, it's definitely something that people need to be concerned with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand that as businesses become more scalable in their ability to deal with cybersecurity, the hacking attempts themselves also become more scalable, right? And so what many of the major financial institutions faced a couple of years ago, so many small businesses are facing today. Bill, let me turn to you because Marty mentioned the work from home and how that has really increased the likelihood or the occurrences of cybersecurity attacks. Many are out there predicting that the traditional office is dead, right? And all the while, we're seeing reports of employers that are fleeing city centers, that are abandoning large workspaces. But ironically, tech firms who liken themselves of being on the front edge of change are doubling down, and they're investing in city centers. They're investing in larger physical plants. How are you guys looking at a post-pandemic return from work, if at all, and what remnants of the work from home culture do you expect to remain?
Well, thanks, Brian, for the question. And again, I'll add my sentiments for the pleasure it is to be a part of this panel. That's a great question, Brian. And it's interesting because we're still kind of navigating through what day do we go back. And what's interesting about that is that if you look across the spectrum of at least the firms in our industry, there's been a variety of different strategies talked about, announced, retracted, a new strategy comes out. We're also trying to understand the impact it's having on team members. We're thinking about how they feel. Interestingly enough, anecdotally, most are quite happy working remotely. And so we're taking and learning not only from the feedback we're getting from our employees, but also we're looking around other industries to see how they're handling it. I don't think the city center is dead by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's basically on hold for a bit until this thing settles down. There's a great article in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday. It was an essay by Nicholas Christakis' new book on the impact of COVID. And what he basically was saying was, look, we're going to go through a couple of years of this, and it's going to have an impact on us. And to try to think about making a decision today would be very difficult because we're still learning. And the reality of it is, as we emerge from the COVID period, whenever that is, we will gravitate back to center cities. So I know that's not an easy and quick solution or answer to your question, but the real answer here is I still think we're learning. And the only other thing I would add to this is that this conversation around productivity and working from home, and whether there's true productivity or has fallen, I can personally tell you that my productivity is up dramatically. The number of distractions are gone. I only live 5 miles from my office, yet I put an extra hour, maybe an hour and a half into my day. I can work whenever I want to work. I'm not bound necessarily anymore to a 9-to-5 world. And as I have been out interviewing folks across not only our industry, but other industries, talking to them about how they're navigating, I'm finding very, very similar comments. And the interesting thing is those folks that worked hard in the office are working harder outside of the office. And those folks who tended not to work quite as hard are working probably less hard. So I still think we have a lot to learn here, Brian, before this thing ends. But I do not think it's the end of the center city.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, right? I mean, this is a work in progress for so many of us, right? And I think the only people that have it wrong are the people that are emphatic about the outcome, right? Because they just don't know, right? And
right.
You have to be brave enough at times to say don't know. But I'm hearing a lot of what you just described, which is within individual firms, there's a splintering amongst personnel. There are some that are taking to it really, really well. And it so happens to be, the types of folks that are on this panel, right? We were often very distracted by having to run to conferences, having to do an on-site or an off-site, having to get to a client's office. For folks like us, this is just a wonderful respite from that life, right? Having to get off of planes on a regular basis. And there are people that underperformed in the office, and that's probably even clearer now, given that folks aren't coming into the office, and all you can see is their performance. But I'm also hearing about a bunch of folks that are in the middle, right, and where they're just not connecting in a virtual world. They're fully capable. They're absolutely willing to do the work, but they're kind of glazed over, and they miss that that office experience. Chris, tell me about what you're seeing over at Wedbush.
So thanks, Brian, and thanks for the opportunity as well. I'll join my colleagues in saying it's an honor to be here on this panel and also at another AdvisorHub conference. What we're seeing at Wedbush is, as Bill described, you have a barbell. There are people who are highly productive, and then there are people who are, I would say, lost. And our experience and our observation is that, and where we've been helping people is to accelerate and adapt to that pace of change. So we've just had a rapid change, an unexpected, everyone's working from home, everyone's working remotely. And, when the tide goes out like that, it really becomes self-evident, adapting to a new routine. Unlike Bill, there's 6 of us here under this roof, and, we have 6 people competing for bandwidth. We've had to completely invest in our bandwidth. We've had to make some pretty significant changes. So, from setting our colleagues up at home with laptops, with a couple of monitors, with better access and backup access, and from that to increasing the communication, and that's been critical. We've seen, if I look at my own family, my mom and dad have their own Zoom account, and they're Snapchatting my children. And this is a change. We've always lived in a period of change. But when I see that happening, we have to think about how are we communicating with our clients, and are we taking advantage of this new digital, these what we used to say is cool fintech, and now it's become a regular part of life. So we've had a lot of seminars, education, a lot of Zoom calls like this, communicating with our advisors, bringing subject matter experts and thought leaders to our team and our colleagues in the field to try to help them stay connected as a goal. And it's been challenging for a lot of people, but then, as Bill said, others have adapted to it immediately. So we've seen a pretty diverse reaction to it, but we've been focusing on delivering the technology and delivering and increasing the communication of the field to make sure that we're doing everything we can ultimately for our clients.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge is across the board, right? Because not only are you trying to help people work under these new circumstances, but you're also having to train managers to manage differently and to supervise differently, right? To look for different things along the way. David, many predicted early on. In fact, there were a number of AdvisorHub articles early on that this pandemic would just cause a wreck when it came to advisor transitions. Yet, while the numbers are still far from totals at the end of the year, advisor transitions have continued despite the pandemic. How are you dealing with that, given a lot of the work from home mandates and the limited ability to set up new offices?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Brian. I know that I was wondering that question, and it has been robust. I think there are a few reasons why advisor transitions are continuing to be robust. One is you have the ability to get not just the advisor's attention, but client attention when you're talking about making a move. And just like, we were discussing in the earlier question, people have learned how to adapt digitally. Second thing is that there's so much you can do from a transition standpoint. As I like to say, contract is king. And if you can establish a new advisory agreement, establish a new brokerage account, by using the technology, whether it's DocuSign or other elements, it's enabled for that seamlessness. Where it can be different is, when you're trying to open up a new office and feel your way around that. That's why, having an established platform to transition to. So, Marty happens to be on the call. We're seeing more advisors consider joining other platforms, like Mariner has platform solutions. Marty can talk about that business. We see that, as well as starting your own shop. So I would say, contract is king is sort of enabled all this. The other thing I'll say, and then I'll let you, talk to my colleagues here, is that I think stability is the new disruptor. And what I mean by that is that the stability of the advisor-client relationship, the stability of institutions you work with, that's what I think clients and advisors are looking for in this, type of environment. So I'm sure we can talk about that more, but that's something that I've been starting to observe more and more as this period ensues.
I think that your last point, well, all the points, but your last point in particular is right on the money. I think with all the change that's happening, people are grasping for what can remain the same, right? Can we take can we tap the brakes on innovation, on the things that I just have come to rely upon, which oddly enough has really tilted the advantage to the transitioning advisor in this unique time, right? Really tough to establish a brand new relationship, even if it's convincing them to stay at the firm that they've been at. Much easier, I suspect, for the advisor that's known them for decades to continue that relationship, even if it means some paperwork. Because guess what? People are home and they don't mind clicking through a DocuSign to make the transition. Marty, how do you distinguish what's been going on across the country? Right, you're sitting smack dab in the middle, right outside of Kansas City, but you've got offices that are now pretty well spread out throughout the U.S. A lot of the distinctions that Bill had mentioned really are fueled by geographic differences, right? Where someone's sitting within the country. How are you migrating through there to make sure that you're establishing the right standards, but obviously geographic sensitive standards for all of your offices?
Yeah, great question. So, the way we've decided to approach it is, technically we're not open anywhere. So everybody is working from home. But our philosophy is, the client is king. So go where the client wants you. So if the client is comfortable doing what we're doing right now, great. If the client wants to meet you for, coffee, lunch, do that. If they want you to come to their house, do that. Obviously, it's got to be the client's desire. But when you think about the middle part of the U.S., the difference is, people are tending to do more things, right or wrong. They're tending to do more things, as opposed to the larger cities on the coast. We're seeing hardly any of that, hardly any demand for going back to the office. And somebody said this before, but the interesting component of it is we'll have people that tell us, I have a 2-hour commute, an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, or longer. I just got that time returned to me. My clients are feeling more interaction now. And, whether or not, we go back to some kind of normal, I do think that pieces of that won't change. The fact that they can be productive at different periods of the day. They'll choose different times of the day to make that trip in, if you will, or just do it on a limited basis. Don't do it 5 days a week. Do it 3 days a week. And I think that flexibility is key. I'm assuming you'll get to this eventually, but what my concern is the culture of the business. Whether it's training and developing, the younger advisors being influenced by their mentor, being influenced by the local leader, those types of things. It's keeping me up at night. The idea that culture is a muscle and you must exercise it or you lose it, is something that I think we all should be worried about.
Yeah, no doubt. So I'll throw this out for anyone to round out this topic. But Are we seeing the move away from commercial real estate and an acceleration of technology spend, and perhaps a decline of culture within organizations? Anyone?
I'll take the first crack at that. I think we've been very carefully, Marty brings up a good point, and we've been very, very careful to preserve the culture of the organization as best we can. And that's through communication from our executive team directly to the advisors on observations on what's happening in the industry, update on the firm. We've kept all of our employee resources groups going. We just had a very successful networking lunch for the Wedbush Organization of Women, but we've maintained, we've shifted from home office events to virtual events where we send out a gift card so people can have lunch and dial in. And we've made very good use of the technology that we have here at the conference in getting people together. But I think that's going to shift. We've obviously, at all firms, have been looking at real estate. And I know one of Tony's favorite lines is, what happens to the ego barn of the past? If you have your large office and you have all of your plaques and your designations, and when you're losing your home court advantage, and advisors have to think about that when they're planning for the next 5 to 10 years. How am I going to operate and differentiate myself and articulate my value proposition when I lose this incredible office with all of my, the testimonials to my greatness that I have around me that I've worked so hard at? And that's going to have to happen virtually. And that's going to be a change. So I think for us, we were less focused on the real estate footprint and more about the digital client experience of the future. How are we going to credentialize our best advisors, help them from a marketing perspective, and embrace the digital solutions with things like client testimonials on video clips and using social media more effectively. So that's where we're focused.
So there's a transition from that physical plant to technology, but not just for people, for really all of the accolades and everything that would support your I guess, for lack of a better term, reputation.
Right. I agree with Bill. We're not going to lose the city centers. They'll ultimately come back one day, but I think we're going to have a blend, and we're going to need to think about how to build that blend into our practice going forward to be competitive and take advantage of the change that's happened.
Yeah. I will tell you, when we go out and we've polled our staff, almost no one is, to Marty's point, no one is rushing to come back to the office, and everyone seems perfectly comfortable at home. I think people like being able to tend to their kids when the kids are doing remote school. And making their way to kids' activities. I can't imagine that drying up, especially when kids return to school. Everyone wants to get to their kids' activities, and so that takes away a huge friction. And so I think Bill's right in his first sentiment, which is we'll get to a new balance point, but we're probably far from there. Let me move on to our next topic. I can't help but acknowledge that despite the amazing amount of talent and success we have on this panel, present company included, that we've got a panel of Caucasian males that are here. And I want to talk about diversity and inclusion. The Black Lives Matter movement and the demands for social justice have reached new peaks during this pandemic. And we're all too familiar. You're not going to hear me repeat them. What the numbers tell us within the wealth management profession and the financial industry and the sector altogether. I want to ask each of you, what is the most significant measure you've initiated to bring about change in your organization or the industry as a whole? Who wants to take first crack at that? Bill, I saw you go off mute first, so I'll send it over to you first.
One word: education. I mean, we have, what I will say about our organization is that we have invested over the last, for quite some time, but particularly, in the last year or so, we really have emphasized awareness and education. I happen to live in the city of St. Louis. I happen to live a block away from the couple who chose to bear arms against some of the peaceful protesters that were out on a Black Lives Matter protest. I live in the city because I chose to live in the city. I wanted to raise my children in a diverse neighborhood. I want them to understand what the world is really like. My biggest fear in life is my own blind spots. And so I think that the more conversations and more education, which is what we've done, we are, in fact, we're just closing out our Diversity and Inclusion Week, which hosts a number of outstanding presentations and information, and it's remarkable. We just continue to encourage people to open their eyes, open their hearts, open their minds, and begin to embrace the differences we have and celebrate those. Because the reality of it is, you're right, Brian. We're sitting here we all look the same, approximately the same age, in the same business. And this is what we've been surrounded with, at least in my career, for far too long. And I think the remarkable thing here, and what we're trying to share with our team members across the footprint, is that we will only get better as an organization, which will only help create stronger and better communities when everyone participates in the process. So it's really getting people involved.
So what I'm hearing is training and education, but also creating a nexus behind these initiatives and a positive business outcome, right? Sharing with people how it actually is going to make you stronger, more resilient as a business.
Absolutely. Because when you look at it, we're going to face an enormous transfer of wealth. We've been talking about it for years. It's inevitable. And the generation there where this wealth is likely to end up has a very different perspective on the world than this group does, and certainly the leadership in our industry has today. And rest assured that until we begin to embrace the actual fabric of our country and our culture and weave it into how we operate and think and the kinds of folks that we can attract to this. I had the honor last year of speaking at the Quad A annual conference in Detroit. And I actually interviewed LaCon Davis, who's the founder of Quad A, for my podcast. I spent 2 hours with the man. It was the most incredible story I'd ever heard. And so, that's a very important part of this thing, is you've got to be curious. We've got to get people to be curious and point back to the fact that you just made, which is the impact, the positive impact it'll have, not just on our business, but on our communities and our culture. And that's really, at the end of the day, I believe, the responsibility we have in this industry.
Yeah. Marty, let me turn to you. You've got your operations, again, we talked about the middle of the country, and then you've got these offices which are really managed at a more local level. How do you deal with that at both levels, right? So that the organization is really operating in an aligned way. And what is that most significant measure that you feel that you've implemented to address this?
Yeah, I think the way that's managed, is, thinking about the locations, the offices that are scattered around. That we refer to that as being in front of the curtain, right? So being front stage, and the client experience component of it. And we have had initiatives for the past 3 years of trying to bring young advisors into the business, and even people that technically aren't even advisors yet, that want to be, and train and develop them. And several years ago, we put an initiative out that we wanted to have more female advisors in our organization, and we went from relatively none to, out of 235 advisors, over 30% are female. And so we're going. The one thing is we're going through that right now. So we've put a task force together, and while that sounds lame, frankly, I didn't want a knee-jerk reaction. I didn't want something that we would do and then not continue to do. So I wanted a group of people to come together and say, here's a thoughtful plan that we can execute over, the next 1, 3, 5 year time frame and really impact the numbers. And I went with the story of bringing in young talent so we can hire and train it. That's how we intend to do it. We intend to do it from the perspective of trying to educate as many people as we can, as diverse as we can, that this is a noble business and that we do great things, and you don't have to know how to do it. We'll train you. We'll develop you. We'll help you accomplish that. The other thing I think about is, for the most part, people want to do business with people that are like them. And if we want to continue to grow our practice, and I think that is a very interesting way to think about incremental growth is getting diverse in that entire approach.
So you're suggesting that one of the ways to go about it is diversifying the client base, and perhaps then financial advisors will come?
The other way around.
Okay.
Diversify the advisors, and then the clients will come.
Okay. David, I know this has been an initiative you and I have talked about before. What do you think is the most significant measure you guys have added beyond what you were previously doing at Fidelity?
Well, I think what I would say is it's enhanced some of the things we've already done. We have a chief diversity and inclusion officer at the firm. My colleague Wendy John, who is phenomenal. But it's not one thing; it's a number of things. It's supporting the attraction, as Marty and Bill and we're saying, around that next generation of talent, and informing them about the opportunities in financial services and the advice as a noble profession. It's supporting some of the groups that are in the ecosystem. For years, I and some colleagues have been involved with the CFP's Center for Financial Planning, and diversity in the profession has been one of the initiatives. I, like Bill, have been involved with the Quad A. I've spoken at their conference, but my colleague Lizetta Rainey Braxton, many of you know her, who is she's the current chair of the organization, is doing something really fascinating. She's actually helping firms embark on a diversity audit. So to Marty's point, it's don't sort of rush into action. Just like any good planning organization would do, be planful about it. And so we have a number of initiatives at our firm, and we're a very big firm, as you know. So it's not one thing, it's a number of things. And the last thing I will say is we've been encouraged, at all levels of our organization, including directly from our CEO, let's have transparent, honest conversations, but it can't just exist in a point of time. It has to become part of sort of the rhythmic, heartbeat of our ecosystem. Yeah,
no doubt. So I think your point is a good one, right? We do like to bring it down to the headline, what is the most significant, but it's not any one thing that solves this, because I speak to CEOs and heads of firms all across this industry, and I can tell you that it's not a lack of intent, right? It's not that there is bias at that top level. I'm abundantly clear on that. The question is, how do we then move the ball forward to something that's measurable? Something I had proposed, and Marty, I understand the task force. I'm wondering if the task force needs to be coupled with a scorecard, right? Because the task force is great, but you don't want the task force just to be the task force, so that you have a group that says we're charged with this. And, so for us, it was, hey, let's establish a baseline, right? Let's understand here's where we are now, so that when we do implement a whole bunch of different initiatives, we can then throw up that yardstick and then say, okay, have they made a difference? Have we participated in making an impact on helping this growing concern?
Yeah, Brian, I know you didn't intend for that to be a softball, but you know me well enough to know that if we do anything, we're measuring it. And we're measuring it, and we're holding people accountable to an objective. And, so the thing we've asked them to do is, start with individuals inside our organization and figure out what those measurements should be, and what is realistic for us to kind of achieve on an annual basis. As with anything, it's great to set a goal, to have a number, but more important to me is measuring the activities to get to the goal than it is the goal, right? So if we're doing the activities right and we're doing them consistently, the success will come eventually. And so that those are the perspectives that we're trying to implement with the task force.
Yeah,
Chris, let me throw it over to you as we round out this topic. What are the most significant measurements you guys are taking over at Wedbush that's going to move the needle and really bring about change?
So thanks for the question. And there's been some great comments, and my colleagues on the panel, we've really been examining this and trying to raise awareness and think differently on the executive committee. So we've had the Wedbush Organization of Women. That's been very, very effective and impactful at our firm in studying, how do we serve our market? And that's a subject matter expertise all on its own. And serving the diverse needs of women executives, and some success. I mentioned the event we just did. We had a leadership series. We've had a lunch and learn on your personal brand, and we continue to host those events. But what we did was, at the executive committee, we invited a gentleman to come in and speak to the committee in one of our EC meetings, and he talked about his life and his professional experience and personal experience as a person of color, and had a very, very heartfelt conversation with all of us in the executive committee just to raise awareness and helping us think differently. And as an outgrowth of that, we had two members of our executive committee, two diverse members of our executive committee, get together and representing all of us have a, as David said, I think, or Marty, it was, I hate the term tactical or strategic. So we just had a listening meeting, and we reached out to all the colleagues of the firm and just asked and said, here's who we are. What do we need to be doing as your executive team, more of, better, or differently? And as an extension of that, based on the feedback that we gathered from our own colleagues and some of the stories that we heard, we put together a 4C committee to really understand what we could be doing as a firm and as a leadership partnership, the executives of the firm, for our colleagues, not only to improve their experience and give them a greater degree of support, but also in thinking about the clients that we serve and the communities that we serve. How can we increase and create a compelling reason for people of color and diverse advisors and support people within our business in the industry to have a compelling reason to come to Wedbush? So that's been a very important part of our focus particularly over the last 6 months, in the backdrop of what you've just mentioned. And it's something we're proud of. We've got some momentum. We've got the right people involved in it. All of the executives are committed to it, and we're committed to making a change.
I think those initiatives are great, and I think at the end of the day, it's really going to be the impact that's going to measure whether any of that, not just what you said, Chris, but any that we all said is enough. And I hope we get to a point where we're all feel comfortable publishing scorecards, for public consumption to help bring about that change, because I think we all agree that it's overdue. I want to shift gears quite significantly right now, and I want to spend a little time talking about regulation. I think we have two recovering attorneys on this panel. But I'll be the attorney in the room that makes sure regulation makes its way to the floor. Regulation, at least modern within our lifetimes of the securities industry, seems to be guided by a pendulum effect. We only see a wave of leadership and rulemaking by regulators after some type of cataclysmic failure, right? Bernie Madoff happens, and guess what? We've got a custody rule at the SEC that's been sitting around for many years. The modern SEC, you could say that they've kept pace with market surveillance, and they've been heavy-handed, if not simply aggressive, with enforcement. But aside from Reg BI, they really have sidestepped any real rulemaking, and presumably will continue to do so until the next big market event. Given the regulators' lack of leadership, and I understand I'm asking a question with my own conclusion, so you feel free to disagree. But given their lack of leadership, has that helped or hurt the securities industry? Bill, you want to start us off there?
Sure, Brian. Thanks for the question. And it's a hard one. I think that it has hurt us in some ways. We are so wrapped up in the regulatory environment. And again, they continue to layer on because of bad behavior. Some event has taken place. And we look to the regulators for more clarity, but the regulations are not typically that clear. We're trying to find ways to work around the regulations. And I'm being completely open and honest here and transparent. There was a recent Wall Street Journal article that was published around the implications of the fact that some 1,300 firms hadn't really disclosed properly the things that were required to be disclosed under the new Reg BI CRS forms and so forth. I always feel like we're fighting each other. And the regulators, well, I guess I'll go back and say that, because there is no leadership and because we have failed to lead, and it's because of the failure of our industry, I believe, to lead this issue, behave in a way that's appropriate, do the right things, the common sense stuff. I have to admit that I've been in the business a long time, and shame on me, but when I took the Series 7 exam, I actually thought I had responsibility to do the right thing for my client. I didn't realize that I didn't, allegedly or apparently, right? So it's a situation where their lack of leadership, only because of our failure, has just, I think, muddied the waters. It'd be nice if we as an industry, as opposed to being great at lobbying, turned around and became great at leading the issues around what it takes to build the right kind of business today to serve clients the way they need to be served.
Yeah, you've got a lot packed in there, Bill. And I think that's probably the idea behind FINRA, right? As a self-regulatory organization, right? That the member firms themselves would lead. Because while I said we were taking a significant turn from diversity and inclusion, I actually don't think that in this respect, it's very different. Because when you speak to the leaders of organizations such as yourselves, they want to do the right thing, right? They want to comply, right? They want to ensure that they're setting up their business to be aligned with the interests of clients. And they are aligned in trying to ferret out bad behavior along the way. What shocks me is when I have direct conversations with policymakers and rule makers, regulators. And for example, the Form CRS issue that you raised, Bill, the whole reason that the Wall Street Journal did that whole expose on all of these firms that aren't properly reporting stuff on Form CRS is because the SEC, instead of utilizing technology to effectively show information in a summary form on a website, left it to individuals and firms to create a largely duplicative document that has no probative value, right? The information's already there, and let's just use technology to go ahead and do that. But when you ask someone, hey, do me a favor, redisclose all of the bad stuff that was on this other form, you are almost inviting the problem when it doesn't need to exist. It seems to be a pattern that we continue to find with that lack of leadership. Marty, how do you expect regulation to impact your business at a macro level looking forward?
I think it's interesting because there's a lot of ways to go with that question. First, I think the environment today is, it's tough. It's a tough regulatory environment, and and I feel very strongly, and I think you do too, that it's going to get more difficult. And I think it's going to continue to lead to, more and more consolidation inside the RIA space. And a lot of the advisors we're talking to are specifically talking about that piece of it. The other thing I think that's interesting though is you talk about the lack of leadership piece of it, and Bill's point about leading it is perfect to this point. Is the regulators that visit us, that we talk to, they don't have a clue what we do. They don't really understand the business and what our advisors do for clients. And I personally don't know how to change that. And I agree with you that their leadership doesn't know how to change it either.
Yeah. So, I think probably what the frustration that you were alluding to, Marty, is just not knowing, right? What what the SEC's priorities are, or how you should handle. I mean, I look at something like their share class initiative, and I can't understand for the life of me why that didn't begin as a rule, right? You don't go back and say, hey, by the way, let's take a look at the activities you guys have done over the last 3 to 4 years, and we'll let you know if that's problematic or not. I mean, I do understand it. It's how I was parented, but that's a different story. There's an orderly process that most agencies follow, right? Where they go out with a concept, they go out with a proposed rule, they get comments back, right? But to regulate by enforcement, or, in your case, what you may see, Marty, is regulating by examination, right, is highly ineffective. It's not scalable, and it leaves people with great intentions left holding the bag for those that are, actually out there doing problematic activity. David, let's talk a bit about regulation. I mean, you guys deal with regulation on many sides, right? Not only within your own business, but helping advisors with their regulatory compliance, hopefully by way of good referral to an industry partner. But how are you seeing regulatory impact as we go forward into the future? You think it's helpful? You think it's a hindrance, and why?
Well, I will, I guess, since we're using legal language, I will confess I'm at least one of the other recovering lawyers on the panel. I don't know who the other one is. Maybe it's Chris. But I actually want to draft off of what Marty's saying and about leadership. I think we as industry leaders, participants, need to do a better job of educating the regulators and the legislators, quite frankly. And I know I participate in some of those efforts because there's, a couple things that are happening. We need to make them more literate in what's happening in the business. But there's business model transition. I mean, it's now, the predominance of the model is either fee-based or fee-only advice. And we need to have them adopt a better understanding of what's really happening in the marketplace and how they can, be better sort of students of the marketplace and where that's going. So I'm active, for example, with the Investment Advisor Association. They do an advocacy day once a year, and other groups. The other thing I would say that I think is another area where we can be helpful is this notion of regulatory harmonization. So, you may have more than one agency taking leadership in overlapping areas. So that can create discord among the agencies themselves. And then, you have to keep track of who you're trying to comply with. So I think the answer is there's going to be more regulation. And our job at our firm, as we like to say, our job is not to anticipate any one thing. Our job is to anticipate everything. So I think that's at least the hunt that we're after, is how can we be better educators of our regulators and legislators.
Yeah, we're continuing to see huge friction at the regulatory across regulators with the issue you just alluded to, which is one foul ends up with several different enforcement actions at different levels, whether it's at the SEC or other federal agencies or one or more states. And that's not to mention that for advisors, right, they may get hung up and have to deal with a membership organization as well. So one little infraction, and all of a sudden, you're battling at many fronts. Chris, I want to turn to you, but I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to cover at least one other topic that I think is going to make its way to the forefront in the coming months and years ahead, which is advisor compensation. We all know historically how advisors have been compensated within this industry. We all can talk about commission versus fees, but more and more as businesses grow and they become more complex, you got conflicts of interest, right? It's not a dirty word. There are conflicts of interest that emerge. What I'm really curious about is the separation of those conflicts so that the advisors who are responsible of giving advice aren't conflicted. The firm may have conflicts and we can disclose those, but how do you see advisor compensation changing as we look to the future?
Well, it's a great question. If you think back to when we started in the business, when I was in the boardroom cold calling, the advisors, a diversified business was, all right, I have my my equity syndicate players. I've got my closed-end fund buyers, my 19C3 desk equity people, and we were just starting to learn about managed money. And, that was your diversified business. And, it's changed. How you're paid has changed, and that'll continue to change. For the last 15 years in coaching sessions, I've been asking advisors, what would you do if speaking of regulators, if on Monday, the Wall Street Journal reads the SEC's outlawed commissions and fees? How would you get paid? Could you call your client up and ask for a $10,000 retainer like a lawyer does? And how would they react to that? And it comes back to articulating value. And we've been focused on how do we really demonstrate that value proposition, particularly now in this environment. But that's not going to change going forward. We're gonna see new and different ways of getting paid, whether it's paid for advice, maybe a hard dollar fee. It could be hourly. It could be subscription. And we're looking at all of those things. G2 and G3 love to pay for their things on a subscription, like Apple Pay for all their music. And how would that impact the practice of an advisor today who's traditionally been paid on transactional or advisory revenue? So these are things that we're studying very closely and thinking about how do we support the advisors as we all have to evolve and adapt to the change that's happening around us, because some of these things are going to be a part of the new normal. And right now we're in the new abnormal. So there's a lot of planning that needs to get done from an advisor's perspective on what the next 10 years will bring, but also from a firm's perspective on how are we going to support the advisor and embrace these new pricing models. And look for how do we satisfy the client need and expectation for advice on demand. So everyone's going to have to be very flexible and very entrepreneurial when we think forward about the way we price our services and the way we not only articulate our value, but we're compensated for it. Because the role of the advisor is never going to change. How we paid might change. But ultimately, our role and our importance in the life of the client, that's going to be here forever, in my opinion.
It's interesting because you talk about the new normal and the evolving methods of compensation. But one thing remains steady throughout. And when I was a kid, my grandmother showed me her brokerage statement, which was with a major wirehouse, and she was being charged a lot of money, hundreds and hundreds of dollars for each securities transaction. I said, why would you pay this kind of commission, right? This is crazy. And she said to me, because he gives me good advice, right? And I don't think any of that's changed, right? Despite all of this other stuff that's going on, I don't think any of that's changed. I think what's changed is companies, when they have shareholders, have a new party that they owe an obligation to. And so as a result, we saw these compensation structures get so convoluted. Right, we get payments coming in from all sorts of directions, and people just lost confidence that was all they were paying. Right, and so they start to call into question, well, how am I paying for my advice, and how else is this advisor making money? So I think transparency has to be part of that. And Marty, you've talked about transparency in advisor compensation, or specifically fees for advisors before. I mean, can you say a bit about, why maybe, that is more important than ever? But I remember from the day you started the firm, that was an important point that you made.
Yeah. The transparency is key. And I'll take it back to what Chris said. So I think it's all about being able to articulate the value proposition, right? So understanding what your client experience is and understanding how to explain it and why it's important to the outcome for the client. And then in that process, being transparent about what the fees are for each level or each stage and why. And you think of it from the perspective of a firm like ours. I mean, we do taxes. We do estate planning. We have a trust company. We have the investment piece of it. We have the planning piece of it. All of those components, but we don't break each one of them down and say, if you use this is the fee for this. But when we do meet with clients, we walk them through, the fee that you're paying us, part of it goes for this and part of it goes for this, and because each one of those areas has a different expert, a different set of people involved in them that need compensated. And so helping them understand that your fee goes to drive these things you're getting, and then on a very regular, consistent basis, show them what their journey has done. So be able to walk them through. Remember, we set up these trusts and this, and that saved you from a tax perspective this way, or whatever it may be. But making sure you're reminding them of their own journey so that they see the value in your value proposition.
Yeah, tying it all back to value proposition. And Bill, let me end up with you. You've got to support various compensation arrangements at through different lines of businesses and well outside of your own firm, right? Well outside of your control. What's your take on all this?
It's a great question. And I do get to see a lot of different approaches to this. And another part of this that we've got to factor into the answer of what's compensation going to look like is what a cost going to look like, right? So much of how we compensate our advisors is based on how much we need to run our companies. And that makes it even more complicated. We've seen that change. And as you mentioned, Brian, the complexity of some of the compensation programs is mind-boggling. I tend to look at thought leaders in the industry, particularly RIAs that are sort of advancing around solving for this particular question of how do I get compensated in an appropriate way, and capture the value, because we are a population that's trained to look for things on sale. We're a population that has been trained by Amazon to expect it immediately and cheaper. And so with that as a backdrop, creating the storyline, and I think as Marty articulated, we have to be able to demonstrate our value, right? And so the folks that are out there in the RIA space, particularly because they have more flexibility, they're beginning to explore how they can capture the value for the service they provide, which is advice. And I think that the traditional model, as you mentioned with your grandmother, while it was very nice that she acknowledged the fact that the gentleman or woman who she was working with gave her good advice, I would challenge that to ask her, tell me what that advice was. Was it you got lucky on a good stock pick? And I think that the issue is that we are in the advice business today. We need to be in the advice business today and separate what we do from the products we sell. And there begins to create a path forward to begin to understand how we would be or should be compensating advisors who are providing advice as opposed to selling a product ought to be compensated. The smart RIAs that I'm talking to today, they have separated, they've moved away from charging basis points in AUM to really saying, look, this is the work I'm going to do for you. This is the advice I'm going to provide you, and this is what it's going to cost you.
Sure.
And I think that's the model that we're going to have to begin to see. And it's going to, there's an article that I think Tony written for AdvisorHub, to give them a quick plug, that really looked at this issue. And the reality of it is that if advisors are going to be successful going forward, they're going to create what I call amazing moments in time for their clients. And to steal a line from commercial television today, that's a value that's priceless. And people will pay for that kind of service when they align the advice and the outcome of the advice with what was given to them by the human being, as opposed to the product that was sold to achieve whatever the objective was.
Yeah, no, great points all around. And just so you know, Bill, I did ask that question to my grandmother as I got older, and that's when she reminded me I'm not nearly as smart as I think I am. So, listen, we're over on time. I could sit here and chat with more topics with this esteemed panel for hours, and I really do appreciate your time. On behalf of Chris, Marty, and Bill, and David, I want to thank our hosts at AdvisorHub and Tony for not only inviting us to participate on this panel, but for coordinating and facilitating everything that went into it. This, just because we're running an event virtually doesn't make it any easier than an on-site event. And really want to applaud their efforts on behalf of the entire panel here. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.
And thank you, Brian, for leading the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tony. Thanks, team. Thanks to the panelists.
Pleasure.
Great
Thank
job.
you.
Thanks, everybody.